Good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to see that you have decided to come out and study with us again. If you will, take out your Bibles and turn to the 23rd Psalm. We're going to be spending the majority of our evening looking at some lessons there from the 23rd Psalm and really looking at that phrase, "The Lord is my shepherd." This is probably the most well-known psalm in the entire Bible here. This is one that we teach to our children. We teach it in Bible classes. It's one of the first ones we have them memorize. Even among the world, this is probably one of the most quoted psalms out there that people know, that we sing, that they recognize. But the really idea here that David is putting forth when he is writing this psalm is what it means to have the Lord as my shepherd. For him personally to be my shepherd and for me to be his sheep. And that's what I want to take some time at this evening as we're walking down through this psalm, looking at some lessons there at what does it mean to have the Lord as my shepherd? What does that mean to you and me personally? The first thing we have to recognize there is that phrase there, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." The first question we have to ask when we're identifying this is, who is my shepherd? And for that, I'd like to turn over to John chapter 10 there in verse 11. This is one of the ways that Jesus identified himself over and over again, referring back likely to Psalms like Psalm 23 there that David wrote. When he's speaking to the people, when he is telling the people that I'm the Messiah, that I have come to seek and save the lost, that I have come to teach you, one of the ways he referred to himself over and over again was this good shepherd, the one who has come to save you and to teach you. And there, just a snippet of this, in John chapter 10 there in verse 11, he tells his disciples there, "I am the good shepherd, and the good shepherd gives his life for the sheep." Jesus says, part of my goal there, just as any good shepherd, when we're protecting the flock, when we are taking care of the flock, that I'm willing to defend them even at the cost of some other animal coming in and killing me. They're my sheep. I will defend them against robbers. I will defend them against bears. I'll defend them against lions. They're my sheep. They're my livelihood. They're my everything. More so than on a physical scale, where you have a shepherd that's willing to give his life for his sheep. Jesus is saying, on the spiritual level, I am your shepherd. And just as we sang this evening about the old rugged cross, we know that he gave his life for us. We know the sacrifices he has gone through because he is our shepherd. And we are his sheep. You and I personally, he died for. You and I personally, as we're walking through this psalm, need to recognize the blessings that he gives us, the protections that he gives us, everything that comes along with all of this here of what it means to have the Lord as my shepherd and for me to be his sheep. Look with me at Philippians chapter 4 and verse 19. I think Philippians 4:19 sums up pretty well of what a shepherd's job is there and what Christ's goal is going to be if he's going to be our shepherd. Philippians chapter 4 there in verse 19. I'm in chapter 2. Chapter 4 there in verse 19. We can read there, Paul wrote there, "And my God shall supply all your needs according to his riches in glory by Christ Jesus." When David put in there in that psalm, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want," it's the same way that Paul is ending his letter to the Philippians here. Jesus is going to take care of me. God is going to take care of me. Everything that I need, God will supply. Because that's what a good shepherd does. A good shepherd is not going to lead his flock into danger so that they can die. A good shepherd is not going to let his sheep starve or die of thirst or not have a pasture to eat in. A good shepherd takes care of his flock. And we're going to see that as we walk down through this lesson. Look with me there at verse number 2 now. At verse 2, he makes me lie down in green pastures, and he leads me beside still waters. The picture David is painting there as he's preaching this psalm, as he's writing this psalm, as he's singing this psalm, is that this shepherd gives me comfort and he gives me rest. That I can trust in him, that he will take care of me no matter what's going to come here. He's going to give me, first and foremost, spiritual rest. And Jesus talks about this over in Matthew chapter 11, there verses 28 down through 30. Matthew chapter 11, picking up there with me at verse 28 down to the end of the chapter. Come to me, Jesus says, all you who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you. Learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy, my burden is light. It's the same kind of promise that David is remembering there in verse 2. He'll make me lie down beside still waters. He'll lead me to still pastures. He will take care of me. He will supply my needs. And I can find comfort with my shepherd. Jesus offers that same promise to us today. More than that, he offers that I will take care of every need that you possibly have. Over there in John chapter 6, there in verse 35. Turn with me again over there in John and read with me if you will. John chapter 6, pick up there now down in verse 35. Jesus is telling his disciples here, I am the bread of life. He who comes to me shall never hunger, and he who believes in me shall never thirst. Now at the time as he's saying this, the crowds following him are looking for a meal ticket. But David recognizes the promise and would have recognized the promise that Christ was giving here just as we do. Christ isn't promising that I'm going to give you a free meal ticket and you're never going to be hungry and you're never going to thirst again. That will eventually come. I'm not talking about your physical needs. Spiritually, remember, I am your shepherd. And if you come to me, if you follow me, spiritually, you are never going to hunger and you're never going to thirst again. I'll supply you with my word. I'll supply you with my blessings. I'll supply you with my promises. If you hunger and thirst after righteousness, I will absolutely fill you. There is more here that men can spend lifetimes in studying and still never be satisfied. There is plenty there for us. And eventually that promise, as we recognize in the scriptures, that we'll get to be with him in heaven for all of eternity, and you really never will hunger or thirst ever again. Those physical needs that you're worried about are going to be taken care of because you're in the presence of God. Because you're there with your good shepherd. With the Lord as my shepherd, I never have to worry. Just as we kind of talked about this morning, we're talking about keeping our priorities straight and staying too busy to serve God. With God as my shepherd and he's taking the helm and he's leading me, then I can put my trust in him that whatever I need, my shepherd's going to provide. That when I'm following him, I can find rest, that I can find comfort, that my needs will be satisfied. Because he's my shepherd, and I'm his sheep. But continuing that thought, there in verse 3, David goes on saying there in verse 3, the shepherd restores my soul. He leads me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. One of the issues that happens when you're taking care of livestock, and especially sheep, because they tend to be a little dumb, is they tend to wander. They need a shepherd. If a sheep doesn't have a shepherd, they just kind of slowly start to scatter. I've worked on sheep farms before over some summers and helped some brethren out with tending sheep. And if you can sit there and just sit on a hill and watch the sheep, they'll start out together and then just kind of slowly graze and drift apart until they kind of scatter over the whole field and they become easy targets. Over in the Psalm, in the 69th Psalm there, David really reiterates this message here again of what it's like for a sheep to be lost, how they wander, how they get into trouble. In the 69th Psalm, let's begin there in verse 1 down through verse 3. Save me, O my God, for the waters have come up to my neck. I sink in the deep mire, where there is no standing. I have come into deep waters, where the floods overflow over me. I am weary with my crying. My throat is dry and my eyes fail while I wait for my God. Here's David writing about a situation in his own life where he lost sight of the Lord as his shepherd. Where he wandered away from God. And he says, I fell into sin and it was like falling into the mire. Where it was like getting stuck in a pit. I was drowning. I was hopeless. And unless my shepherd hears my cry, unless my God hears me pleading out so much that my throat is turning dry, I'm going to be lost and I'm going to die forever. That's the situation of a sheep that has lost its shepherd and has lost his way. But the promise we have there from a shepherd is that he restores my soul. That he'll come and that he'll find me. That if I call out, he's listening for that. That's part of the shepherd's job. To keep watch of the sheep, and yes, even if a sheep wanders, that he's going out, that he's listening for their cry, and when he hears it, he goes and he brings them back. And then when he goes, when he restores my soul, that I put my trust in him, that the paths that he's going to lead me down lead me to righteousness. That they're going to be safe. That I know wherever he leads me, I'm not worried about getting stuck in the mire again. I'm not worried and in fear for my life again, because now I'm following my shepherd and I'm not following my own paths. Over there in Matthew chapter 7, there verses 13 and 14, Jesus uses this kind of terminology again there. And we can tie it back to this Psalm 23. Matthew 7, beginning in verse 13, enter by the narrow gate. For wide is the gate, and broad is the way that leads to destruction, and there are many who go in by it. There are a lot of sheep, there are a lot of souls in this world that it's very easy to wander straight into hell. It takes no effort whatsoever to become lost. To become stuck in the mire. To become hopeless without the Good Shepherd. But remember, the Good Shepherd leads us down paths of righteousness. He restores our soul. Verse 14 of Matthew chapter 7, because narrow is the gate and difficult is the way which leads to life, and there are few who find it. Part of the job, if you look up some of the jobs of these shepherds when they were in Israel, when they were wandering around, some of the paths that they had to take were dangerous. They had to go down steep cliffs, and they had to be able to take their sheep and lead them and keep them corralled and keep them going in the right direction. They had to lead them through area where there were wolves, where there were beasts, where there were robbers that would come and would attempt to steal it. And if the sheep wandered off, he might very well lose his life. But the path the shepherd knew, and knew well, if they followed, they'd stay safe. Spiritually, it's the same for our shepherd and for us as his sheep. That yes, if I get lost, if I call out to my God, he'll take care of me. And that the path he has chosen, it may be difficult at times, and we'll talk about that here more in just a moment, but it's the path to righteousness. It's the path to that narrow gate. It will not lead to destruction. This is kind of a term that gets thrown around very callously in our society today. And it's talked about as being a bad thing to be a sheep today. That you just blindly follow and you just cover your eyes and you don't pay attention to what's going on in the world in the world around you. But God is likening this to a good thing when you follow your shepherd. But it's a bad thing when you become easily distracted and wander away. Over in Isaiah 53 and verse 6, Isaiah writes there, all we like sheep have gone astray. Each one of us has turned away, every one to his own iniquity, and God has laid on him the iniquity of us all. God recognizes that we're just a lot like sheep. That if no one's teaching us, if no one's leading us in the way, and if we're not following a good shepherd, we're going to get lost. It's an inevitability. It's going to happen. All men have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. That's what men are going to do. That's why God supplied that need in giving us a shepherd in the first place. So that he can restore our souls. He laid him down, the iniquity of us all. And so that he can lead us in a path of righteousness so that we can be with God forever. That's the shepherd's job, and it's our job as sheep to follow him. And yes, get down to verse 4. There are times, as we were talking about, he'll lead us in paths of righteousness. Sometimes the paths will lead into dangerous places. Now we can see kind of a tonal shift here in this psalm. Where before he's been talking a lot about comfort, and he's been talking a lot about rest, and what the shepherd does, and how he'll save us. Now David recognized that there are times the shepherd's going to lead us into dangerous places where we're going to be surrounded by enemies. Even still, take comfort because the Lord is my shepherd. Read with me verse 4. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. For you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. I need to take solace in my shepherd, in my leader as his sheep, when I'm in the dark times in life. When I'm walking through that valley of the shadow of death. When, as we'll talk about in even more detail in verse 5, when my enemies are surrounding me, I need to have faith, just like Paul tells Timothy over there in 2 Timothy chapter 1 there in verse 7. That God is on my side, that he is my shepherd, and no matter what Satan throws against me, with God on my side, I can come through. In 2 Timothy 1, I'm in Thessalonians, 2 Timothy chapter 1, there in verse 7. For God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power, of love, and of sound mind. Sometimes our reactions as Christians, when we lose sight of the Good Shepherd, is we're constantly afraid of what Satan is going to throw at us next. And that whatever he does throw at us, we're going to break. That's the attitude of a sheep who has no trust in their shepherd. That's the attitude of a sheep who is cowering when the shepherd is protecting him, and they're ready to bolt at the slightest sign of danger. Do you know what happens to sheep that act like that? When there's a lion or a wolf that is trying to attack the flock, and the shepherd is corralling them, he is protecting them, he is keeping their enemies at bay, and you've got a sheep that gets too afraid and bolts, it's a sheep that goes off to the wolves and never comes back. It's a sheep who stops trusting in their shepherd, and the enemies get a hold of them. We can't be sheep like this. Over in Luke chapter 8 there in verse 25. But he said to them, where is your faith? And they were afraid, and he marveled, saying to one another, who can this be? And they marveled and said to one another, who can this be? For he commands even the winds and the waters, and they obey him. Here's the example here where Christ is there in the boat. He's fallen asleep. They're crossing the water, and this storm comes upon them, and his apostles are terrified. They're worried, we're about to die, and they wake Christ, and he commands the waters and the storms, peace, be still. And they're sitting here marveling, who is this? What kind of power does he have? Who are you that you're able to literally command the waves and the winds to stop at your word? They had the shepherd right there in their midst. Jesus reprimands them as you go on further. That I was right here the whole time. You were afraid for your life. I was here protecting you. I'm in the boat with you. Nothing was going to happen to you. But here you were at a moment's notice ready to abandon ship, to take your chances with the storm, and you were going to die. Because you didn't put your trust in me. Because the storms in the moment looked greater than your shepherd. When we become Christians that are cowering, that are ready to bolt. We're not sheep like David's talking about there. That I fear no evil. That your rod and your staff, they comfort me. That you can lead me through the shadow of the valley of death, and I come out unharmed. Because I know you, I know your power, and that you can lead me through anything. That has to be our attitude as sheep, and that is actually a comfort there. That our shepherd will protect us. That yes, the devil is out there, as 1 Peter 5 and verse 8 talks about, like a roaring lion on the prowl, seeking whom he may devour. But just like David recognized, he stood, he fought for his sheep, he protected his sheep, and they came out okay. How much greater is my God, who is my shepherd, who is able to do the same for me? That he watches out for Satan, that he knows that Satan is out there on the prowl ready to pounce, but that I can still be protected because my Lord is my shepherd. That just as Paul writes there in Romans chapter 8 there in verse 31, what then shall we say to these things? If God is for us, who can be against us? Or as some translations say, who can stand against us? My God is on my side. What can Satan do to me that can overthrow my shepherd? What can Satan send my way that I and my God cannot handle? And the answer is nothing. That I can have the confidence like David and my shepherd and say, I fear no evil. I'm comforted by my shepherd's presence. I don't have to worry because my shepherd is here. And yes, keep in mind, the shepherd may use discipline to help keep you in line. One of the things that shepherd's crook is for, that you see them carrying. Yes, it's there to fend off the enemies that are trying to come in and the animals that are trying to come in and devour the flock. But the other thing it's used for is to reach out and hook around the sheep's neck and pull them back. It's just as much there for discipline as it is for protection. That when the sheep start to wander off, to remember, we're in the valley of the shadow of death. Enemies are around us at all times. Satan is out there prowling like a lion. He's trying to get a hold of you. I may have to discipline you and bring you back. Hebrews chapter 12 there in verse 6. For whom the Lord loves, he chastens and scourges every son whom he receives. You start to wander off, and your good shepherd may chastise you. He may chasten you. Those that are worried about you as your fellow sheep may come to you with God's word that comes directly from the shepherd and tell you, listen, you are wandering off. Are you aware of the dangers that are coming for you? You need to come back. That's the shepherd working on you. To remind you that don't become complacent. When you're with me, you're protected, but when you start wandering off on your own, you're right picking for Satan. You'll fall prey because you're defenseless. Because on your own, you can't stand against him. Because without me, you're powerless. You start wandering off and you're going to fall right back into that mire. Because you chose to leave. No, a good sheep turns to their good shepherd and has confidence there to say, I will fear no evil. More than that, really continuing on with this same mentality there, read with me verse 5 of Psalm 23. David writes there, you prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil, and my cup runs over. As the shepherd, David recognizes, is leading me through life, is leading me down that path of righteousness, even when it crosses through that valley of the shadow of death. Even when enemies are coming and surrounding me. Even when they are in our very midst, you prepare a table before me. You feed me. You take care of me. You make sure my needs are dealt with. Even when Satan has us absolutely surrounded, you can still take care of your sheep. And that's comfort there. That's a reminder there that really likens back to 1 Corinthians chapter 10 there in verse 13. When Paul tells those Corinthian brethren, read with me again at this, if you will. No temptation has overtaken you except such as common to man. We read that and we quote that and sometimes we forget the rest of the verse. But God is faithful, who will not allow you to be tempted beyond what you are able to bear. But with the temptation will also provide a way of escape that you may be able to bear it. It's the same mentality that David is writing there. That yes, when Satan has us surrounded, when it looks like there is nowhere to go, when all is lost, when it is hopeless, you prepare a table there before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup runs over. That if I'm focusing on you, that I'm not worried, first and foremost, about the enemies that are at the gate, that are surrounding me. I'm focused on the blessings that you are providing, even in the midst of my enemies. That's what it means to be a sheep of the Good Shepherd. It's the idea there that you anoint my head with oil. It's the same as Peter talks about over in 1 Peter chapter 2 there in verse 9. It's the idea there that a good shepherd treats his sheep like family. That every one of them is precious and none of them are expendable. That he will bless them all, he will treat them all equally, and he will make sure they're all taken care of. 1 Peter 2 there in verse 9, Peter talks about this mentality where he says, you are a chosen generation, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, his own special people, that you may proclaim the praises of him who called you out of darkness and into his marvelous light. That my shepherd has anointed my head with oil. I am his sheep. I am his family. I am his own special people. That as he has been promising from verse 1 that we have been looking at, that he is leading me on paths of righteousness. He is my shepherd. He is leading me towards something better. Because I am his sheep and he is my shepherd. And that what I get to look forward to, even Satan and his best efforts cannot thwart. As long as I follow my shepherd. As long as I follow my God. Over there in Malachi chapter 3 there in verse 10, God kind of challenges the children of Israel there. In Malachi the 3rd chapter there in verse 10, God tells the people, bring all the tithes into the storehouse, that there may be food in my house. And try me now on this, says the Lord of hosts, if I will not open for you the windows of heaven and pour out for you such blessing that there will not be room enough to receive it. God says, try me on this. Test me on this. Challenge me. See if I can make your cup overflow. Just look at the blessings that I am going to provide for you as my sheep. Start counting them. Start looking at all the blessings that I can give you. You won't have room enough to receive it. You're going to be overwhelmed. You won't know what to do with everything that I can heap upon you, with blessings upon blessings. That's a shepherd who prepares a table before me, even in the presence of my enemies. That's a shepherd who takes care of me in spite of what Satan is trying to take away. Because ultimately there in verse 6, we have that promise there that David recognized and we need to recognize as well. Surely, goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. These are not temporary blessings. Sometimes people want to take this psalm and they want to separate it into periods of our life. That, well, there are times that we're walking on paths of righteousness, and there are different periods of our life that we're in the valley of shadow of death, and there are different times when our cup runs over, and all these are kind of separate periods in our life, and I don't really agree with that. This is a continually repeated process. That if the Lord is my shepherd, that He's constantly leading me down a path of righteousness. That Satan is constantly trying to pull sheep away from the shepherd. That my shepherd is constantly protecting me. That Christ is continually blessing me. That He is making sure my needs are met. Because that's what it means to be His sheep. That's what it means to have Him as my shepherd. That all the days of my life, as David is writing here, this is going to follow me. I will have goodness. I will have mercy. I will have protection. I will have comfort. I will have a shepherd that treats me like his family and cares for my soul. And this will continue as long as I live. And that in spite of Satan's absolute best efforts, I can dwell in God's house. I can dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Satan's goal for you and me as sheep is to pull us away from the shepherd and to keep us separated until we die in that position. He's just like any other wolf or lion or bear. He wants you away from the shepherd so that he can devour you. But a good sheep recognizes the blessings that come with being there with the shepherd and the promise there that I can live with him for all of eternity. If you're interested in following the Good Shepherd this evening, you have the opportunity. You can become a Christian tonight. To follow him. To dedicate yourself to him. And all of these blessings that we have been looking at this evening, they'll be yours. You just need to be baptized. You need to do as God commands so that you can be one of his sheep. And if you're here this evening and you're like the sheep that Isaiah talked about in Isaiah 53 and verse 6, you're a sheep that has gone astray. You've allowed Satan to lure you away. You're missing out on the blessings that God has for you. But the shepherd still wants you to come back. He'll take you back. He'll receive you, but you have to call out and ask for help. Whether that means praying to God and asking him for forgiveness because of a private sin, or because of a public sin that has brought shame upon the church, that you come forward and confess those things. Whatever the case is, the shepherd is waiting for you this evening. He wants to bestow his blessings upon you so that your cup runs over. He wants to anoint you with oil so that you can be a part of his family. And he wants to give you comfort in spite of what Satan is trying to throw your way and discourage you. Whatever the case may be, if the need calls for it, please come forward now as together we stand and sing the song that has been selected.